Hey y'all, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are when you see this video. Thanks for joining me, Dorothea, on Through an Orthodox Christian Lens. It is August 13, 2025. I have a interesting video for you, somewhat funny, somewhat ridiculous, somewhat outrageous, somewhat dumb, really, but not on the count of the issue of head coverings and all that, but some comments on this that I thought were important. So let's just go here. So as you know, I shared a video this morning on, I shared some clips from Tucker Carlson's interview with Mother Agapia. I think it was Agapia, however you say it, Agapia. And we had some comments in his page that were really just, I can't say other than ignorant. So this person says, this Canadian for Freedom says, if she is a Christian, why the hair covering? It seems to me that you've been duped. So first off, everybody knows that nuns wear head coverings, and it is a tradition. But let's go on, because there's somebody else that says, yeah, why, it's SDM and Tim says, yeah, why is a Christian wearing Muslim coverings? I mean, I'm sure we don't want to see what's beneath. This is how Orthodox nuns have always dressed. They've always covered their hair, and even Catholic nuns dressed like this. It's a tradition in Christianity, in ancient Christianity. It actually comes from a Jewish tradition before it got to that. It's a custom, tradition from a couple thousand years. I'm going to just show you this one website. This is Orthodox information on this, Orthodox Christian Church information. So the main passage involving women's head coverings in Scripture is 1 Corinthians 11, 2 through 16. In this letter in Corinth, St. Paul speaks to a number of problems occurring in their church community. The letter contains several sections which he uses to discuss 7 major issues with his spiritual children. So there they are. The passage in question falls under the third to last category, Eucharistic theology and practice. This tells us we are dealing with worship specifically, rather than other aspects of everyday life. This is a key distinction, as it differentiates Orthodoxy from Islam, which requires women covering their heads and, in some cases, everything but their eyes at all times when in public. Let's see. Naturally, an Orthodox woman can choose to wear a veil in public if that is her desire. However, the faith did not require this, nor is it enforced in the way we see in Islam. And I think most Muslim women wear the hijab. I can't even pronounce it, but it's a nice little head covering, kind of like scarf around their face, and around their head, and their face is open. There's nothing covering, no veil over their face. I think that's the most common type of head covering for them. In any case. So what does St. Paul mean? Well, he clearly exhorts the people to follow the traditions, oral and written, he passed down to them. A woman covering her head is one of those traditions, which was also an accepted Jewish practice throughout the Old Testament. It carried over into Christian tradition, as we can see in St. Paul's letter, the writings of the Church Fathers, and in our iconography. More on these last 2 in a bit. So, requesting this of a woman is not oppression or sexism, but rather an incredible compliment. Early Christian women chose to submit themselves to the church and not allow their beauty to distract others during worship. St. Paul writes that this form of piety brings honor upon a woman, as her hair is a glory to her. Covering the thing that brings her glory in the presence of God is an act of submission and humility before Him. Any woman who submits to God in this way truly is a shining example to those around her. We have this from the Church Fathers on head coverings. Tertullian of Carthage, so too did the Corinthians themselves understand. In fact, at this day, the Corinthians do veil their virgins, what the apostles taught their disciples approve. Clement of Alexandria. Woman and man are to go to church decently attired, for this is the wish of the word, since it is becoming of her to pray veiled. Hippolytus, I don't know how to say that, of Rome. In the apostolic tradition, a work ascribed by this man, he says, and let all women have their heads covered with an opaque cloth. John Chrysostom, the Golden Mouth. The business of whether to cover one's head was legislated by nature. When I say nature, I mean God, for He is the one who created nature. Take note, therefore, what great harm comes from overturning these boundaries, and don't tell me that this is a small sin. Now, he's pretty hardcore. He has a very strong rhetoric at that time. But in any case, he says in this sermon during the Feast of the Ascension, he further asserts the angels are present here. Open the eyes of faith and look upon this sight. For if the very air is filled with angels, how much more so the church? Hear the apostle teaching this when he bids the women to cover their heads with a veil because of the presence of the angels. So, then we have Augustine of Hippo. It is not becoming even in married women to uncover their hair, since the apostle commands women to keep their heads covered. And here's head coverings on women in iconography. As you know, that's pretty common. Of course, the Theotokos, everybody wants to emulate her because she's the top saint of all time. Yes, a woman. The Mother of God is the top saint of all time. Nobody is really higher than her in the human world. So, women are encouraged to emulate her. She always wore a head covering. Who better to serve as an example to women than the mother of all Christians? Then you have all these other saints that have them on. Some women have, some of them here, I can't read who it is, but she has a head covering as well as her crown. So obviously she's of royalty, probably a queen, a princess or empress or something, or queen. There's another one as well. Then the rest have regular head coverings, like here. We have head covering here. Of course, the Theotokos. So all these saints have head coverings. Let's see. Notice that every female saint in this icon wears some sort of head covering. Yes. The only two Christian women without head coverings in their icons are Saint Mary of Egypt and Eve, the first mother. The former did not wear one in her icon because the clothes she took with her to the desert disintegrated into rags. She had only the cloak of Saint Zosimus brought to her. And the latter, Eve, is depicted either with fig leaves or garments of skin, because it was until she ate of the fruit that she remained naked and unashamed with Adam in paradise. So the primary reason Christian women choose to wear head coverings during worship is to adhere to the holy tradition of the church. After all, women covering their heads during worship is an ancient practice in the Christian church. So, of course, it's fallen into disuse, especially in the West, in the more modern days. But Catholics women also covered their heads, and some still do. But it's I've heard it's actually coming. More women are going back to doing head coverings, not just the Orthodox women. So, important to know that. Let me see here if I can play a little portion of this. It's kind of long, but I'll try to play a little portion.
Honor her by wearing a head covering.
Talking about honoring the Theotokos.
You may have
Mother of
noticed
God.
that more and more ladies have been wearing head coverings at church, and many of you have asked me, what is the purpose of a head covering? Why are they worn in the church? Is it something that's necessary? So I'd like to spend a little bit of time this morning teaching on this subject. When we stand before an icon of the Theotokos in prayer, whether at home or in church, we see her beauty through her modesty. And this modesty is not only an interior modesty, but it is also exhibited in her appearance, in how she dresses. Now, a head covering may be the last thing on your mind, or maybe it's not even on your radar when it comes to ways that we can honor the Theotokos. But I ask you this morning to have an open mind and an open heart as I share with you the teachings of Scripture, the Holy Church, and the Holy Fathers. The purpose of my teaching today is not to condemn or to judge or to exclude anyone in any way, but rather to encourage you and offer an opportunity for growth in your spiritual life. Everything I say because I love you, and as your Father, I desire you to grow in the knowledge of God and in holiness. Before we get into the theological and spiritual dimensions of head coverings, I want to first offer you a little bit of historical and cultural context. It's important to note that for almost 2,000 years, Christian women willingly and joyfully wore head coverings in worship. And in many parts of the world today, they still do. In America, it wasn't until the middle of the 20th century that women stopped wearing head coverings. In chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians, verse 10, he says, women ought to cover their heads for the sake of the angels. Did you hear that? Women ought to cover their heads for the sake of the angels. What in the world does that mean? There's something special about the nature of woman and her glory. Something that, according to Saint Cyril of Alexandria, makes it extremely hard for angels to bear when a woman's head is uncovered in church. If you think about the appearance of angels throughout Scripture, and this is very interesting, men and women have different reactions to their appearance. Men typically fall down in fear when approached by an angel, as in the case of the prophet Daniel in the book of Daniel and of the apostle John in the book of Revelation. Women, on the other hand, seem to have casual conversations with angels. Men fall and women just conversate with them. It seems that angels are afraid of women and not the other way around. We hear in the hymnography of the church how the archangel Gabriel was awed by the beauty of the Theotokos. Why is it that men fall before angels, but angels fall before women? There is a mystery about woman, because through woman, everything is offered. The ability to give birth to life and her participation in this creative process is unique to her role. A man cannot give birth. And the greatest offering of man to God was made by a woman, the Holy Theotokos, who gave her flesh and blood to Christ, the Theanthropos, the God-man. And this, according to Tim McFadden, is a big deal, because whenever angels see a woman now, they say, that's the kind that gave birth to God. That's the kind that gave birth to God. So women radiate in a way that men do not. And ultimately, this is a mystery and something beyond our nature to understand.
And by the way, when they say a woman gave birth to God, many certain Christian sects do not understand what that means. He's talking about Christ, God, the second person of the Trinity, because he is 100% God, 100% man.
St. John Chrysostom, in one of his homilies on the Feast of Ascension, says, "The angels are present here. Open the eyes of faith and look upon the sight. For if the very air is filled with angels, how much more the church?" Then he continues, "Listen to the Apostle Paul teaching this when he bids the women to cover their heads with a veil because of the presence of the angels." My beloved family, the angels are present with us right now as we worship. We may not fully understand why head coverings are important to the angels, but isn't it enough that Scripture commands it? If you think about it, there are many aspects of Holy Tradition that are not explicit in Holy Scripture, but we keep them and we observe them. But it's interesting that head coverings are very explicit in Scripture, and somehow we think it's just a recommendation or not necessary. In fact, St. Paul, in the opening of chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians says this, "Keep the traditions just as I deliver them to you." And can you take a guess what the very first thing he mentions after that verse is? Head coverings. And he does this just before going into the details of the Eucharist. So he brings together the head coverings and Holy Communion. And he says, keep these traditions. If it's taught in Scripture, and it's taught by the Holy Fathers, and St. John Chrysostom, the author of the liturgy we celebrate, calls it a mega matter. And St. Paul says to wear the head covering for the sake of the angels. How can we be so dismissive? Consider something else. And this is really interesting about the liturgical practice of the Church. Whatever is most precious and most holy, whatever is glorious and mysterious, is always covered by a veil. We cover the altar table. We cover the chalice and the discos when we process with them in the great entrance. We have a veil that covers the altar behind the doors. A woman's head covering is just like these coverings. This is why St. Paul says, a woman brings honor to herself when she covers her head. Removing head coverings does not raise the status of women, it actually lowers it, according to St. Paul. Imagine walking into church and every liturgical veil, every covering, every vestment is missing. The church would not feel the same. It would be missing something, because those coverings bring honor to what they cover, and head coverings bring great honor to women. I want to end by saying a word about the impact of a head covering on the spiritual life of a woman. A head covering isn't just an exterior custom. It has great meaning for the soul because it contributes to modesty and humility. Again, look at any icon of the Theotokos, who is our prime example. There is a correlation between the interior and the exterior. Just think about when you're wearing your pajamas versus when you're all dressed up. You feel a different way. A soldier in his joggers versus a soldier in his uniform will carry themselves in very different ways. Many women notice that when their head is covered, it affects their behavior and their thoughts in church. They're more sober and they're more prayerful.
Interesting.
Putting a head covering on in church is also a way to acknowledge that church is no ordinary place. It's a holy place. You're not going to the mall. You're not going to a restaurant. You're entering the house of God to worship the living God. Head coverings also encourage humility. When a woman comes to worship, she should not draw attention to herself. We come to church to be noticed by God, not by other people.
Okay. Pretty important information there. I found that fascinating. That's why I shared it with you. I saw it a few months back, and I was just really, really amazed by it. I found that it's just he explained it so much better than reading it and in these articles. So I shared that with you. Let's see. The other thing I wanted to say about head coverings. That's why it's important, and why nuns have always worn them. It's for humility. It's for a respect to God, and of course all the things he mentioned here. The other thing I want to say on this is some people are calling her they're saying, oh, is this a woman because she has facial hair? And ridiculous things. Mother, she's a Catholic and pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian. First off, the ignorance in this. Mother Agapia is not a Catholic or a nun or a Catholic nun. She's not Catholic. She's an Eastern Orthodox Christian. Okay? And and again, people are, they tend to center on Hamas's terrorism. You see, people are just so misinformed. They just followed all of this false information. And so they go on about her having these the hair issue, the facial hair issue. And I made a point of saying that she's a nun. She doesn't spend time plucking, tweezing, waxing, putting nair on to get rid of her mustache. This is it's really ridiculous, because some women do get facial hair, and even during menopause, hairs come out everywhere. That's just how it is. Change in hormones, things like that happen. And I couldn't believe that some women, women don't have facial hair. I actually saw that in one of the comments, and I had said, yes, especially Mediterranean women, Greeks, Italians, we have Hispanic women, we have even Arab women. They tend to get facial hair that is dark, obviously, if they have dark hair. And the idea that they don't, some do. I know this for a fact, because my mother is Greek, and she has facial hair. My sister has facial hair. I have facial hair. And the only reason we don't is because we do whatever, trim, do nair, or whatever else to get rid of our hair. Because we have we live in the world, and we have more of a vanity about ourselves. But that's not the case for nuns. They don't care about their looks. It's not about their looks. It's about serving God. And they live in a more humble and pure way. And that is why she has not done anything. No makeup, no tweezing of the eyebrows, no plucking, no nairing of the little mustache hairs. None of that. No foundation. None of that. Because that's not what nuns are. That's not what nuns do. One other thing is, I just wanted to bring up this thing about, and as you know, the ancient Jewish tradition was head coverings. The Christian tradition is still head coverings, and many Christian sects actually did that for, as he said, until like the middle of the 20th century. We have Mennonite women, Amish women that do this. It's all the same thing. They do them for the same reasons. And I just love the way Father Malza put it. It's just beautiful. Now, we have the Muslim women that do, in their own way of their beliefs, but it's still done. And also, it's interesting to note as far as this practice. I also want to tell you that Islam's mosques, they actually replicated the design with the dome and all that from the Byzantine architecture of churches. That's because that's how the Byzantine churches were and still are. So that is actually where the mosques got that design from. So I wanted to share all that. I hope you got something out of it. Maybe it's informative, interesting. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for following my channel. Until next time.